I pulled myself away from Justin Verlander is blanking the Yankees, which is very important to Met fans on two levels. Do you follow this? Do you care? Are you still with the Red Sox?
No, yeah, I'm still Red Sox.
Okay. Well, they stink, so good luck with that. But I can't tell you how thrilled I am that you came here to do this. And I know you are a believer that podcasts are like going to be the medium that television was for your uncle, President Kennedy, radio for FDR, right?
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking that there's kind of a battle now between legacy media and all of these kind of news sources of content and information, and that, this campaign is kind of Armageddon potentially for the legacy media. And I'm in my own world. The legacy media is just fiercely, ferociously opposed to my candidacy, and every article is a nightmare. But somehow there was an article that came out today, a poll that came out today in Forbes, that showed that my favorability ratings are better by far than any of the other candidates, and I'm not, bragging about that, but it's just curious because all of that.
I hate to interrupt you, but if you're running for president, you should brag. That's people lose elections sometimes because they're too modest. You know who is not very modest? Donald Trump.
Yeah, that's a good point.
It kind of works for him. I mean, not to that extent.
Self-promotion works.
Democrats are very often, the people are very often with them more on the issues, the voters, and yet the voters don't vote for them, because I feel like they're not real, they don't make the connection, oh, you did this for me. Like, I'm alive because I have this health care or this poverty program that didn't exist before Medicare, Social Security, whatever. I think when LBJ took office, the senior poverty rate was something like 35%, and we took it down to 9%. Those are like real things, but I don't think they touted it. They don't get the message. They always say, we didn't get our message out. Well, I think that's part of it. You didn't connect why this person has this benefit to, we did that. You don't think that's true?
I do think, I don't know if it has to do with promotion, but I think a lot of time, I think most of the people who got the advantage of that probably were not thinking, saying thank you to LBJ every night.
Yeah. Well, I know you hated him, right?
No, I didn't hate him. He was actually very kind to me.
He was?
Yeah, the one night that I had this very sort of frightening, I suppose, confrontation with him at we went to, after my uncle was killed, LBJ was very jealous of my father. And so, but my father remained friends with a lot of people who were in the administration, like Bob McNamara and many, many others, Dick Goodwin, and all the New Frontiers people were in the administration. My father would have them come to Hyannisport for the weekend, and when they were there, LBJ would always call them, and he would call them to let them know that he knew that they were at my house, which he considered, an act of disloyalty. But one night we went over, my mom and I, and my two elder siblings, and I think a couple of my younger ones went over to McNamara's. McNamara was the Secretary of Defense.
Yeah.
Or President Kennedy, and then he stayed on with Johnson.
Former head of GM, wasn't he?
And Ford. And my father was very close, and my father would call him every night and tell him, you got to, publicly condemn the Vietnam War. And McNamara would say, if I leave here, he'll drop an atom bomb. And I got to stay here and stop him from doing that.
Similar to Colin Powell, who said, I stayed in the Bush administration because without me, there wasn't going to be an adult in the room. Same thing, right?
Yeah. And it may be valid. But anyway, my father talked to him every night. The last thing he did before he went to bed, he always called McNamara and told him, you got to go public, and we got to get out of Vietnam. One night we went up, but he remained very close to McNamara. And one night we went up to McNamara's for dinner, and and in the middle of dinner, Johnson came in unannounced. So as the President of the United States, walks into the house, and he was a very, very big man. He had a huge head, and that's what I remember. And we were all rushed out of the house. The kids were...
Shrek.
Yeah.
Comes in.
And my father, but when I got injured when I was a kid, I got 147 stitches in my leg. I sliced up 2 of my toes, and Johnson wrote me when I was in the hospital. Johnson wrote me a series of very, very kind of kind, sweet, very corny personal letters.
Really?
Yeah.
How old were you?
I was like 11, 12.
What did you do?
My brother was chasing me on a roof, and I jumped to another roof and didn't make it.
I got to say, this gene in the Kennedy family for doing like really reckless things, I feel like this is something the public needs to be assured about. Because really, there's been a lot of loss that is noble loss, the assassinations, of course, but then there's just been a lot of reckless behavior, and that hurt other people and hurt. Didn't you have a skiing death?
My brother died in a ski accident.
Playing ski football or something, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and John Jr. should not have been flying that plane. I feel like you're making...
I'll say one thing about Johnson, too, which is that, everybody knows about the conflict between my father and Johnson that started very early because my father did not want Johnson to be vice president. He didn't like him, and he didn't trust him.
That I remember.
Right, and when my uncle decided it was going to be Johnson, he sent my father up to tell him, which was excruciating for my father. My father never liked him, and then Jack did not pay a lot of attention to him as vice president, which hurt his feelings. And meanwhile, my father was kind of in charge of everything. So they had this antagonistic relationship, and then when Jack was killed, Johnson saw my father as his principal rival. And then when when Johnson was nominated in Atlantic City in 1964, so Johnson, took over in November of 63 when my uncle was killed. Then he was president for a little over a year. He had to run again, and the Democratic nomination was in 64. And my father showed up went to the convention very reluctantly because he was still shattered. It was one of his first public appearances, and they played a video about my Uncle Jack, and at the end of the video, there was a line from Shakespeare that said, and when he dies, something to the extent, when he dies, cut him in little bits and throw him to the stars.
I remember your father saying that.
Yeah, and he said that, and he shall make the garish moon, jealous of the darkness. And Johnson took that personally. He thought that it was an allusion to him being the garish moon because he was going to recruit Jackson. Well, he took that as a slight, and then he saw my father for the next 4 years of rival, and then, ultimately my father did run. But during that period when they had this rivalry, my father, particularly in the early days after my Uncle Jack's death was absolutely shattered, and he was almost... he was disconsolate, and he was almost catatonic. he was so shattered that he wasn't going to work, and he would walk around in hikes all the time and not really talk to anybody. And Johnson was worried about him and sent him on 2 foreign missions. One of those missions was to Indonesia. Indonesia was about to go to war. Sukarno, who was the liberator of Indonesia, who the CIA had tried to kill, was about to go to war with the Netherlands. And Johnson sent my father there to try to settle this dispute, which he did. He had made friends earlier on with Sukarno, and they had a good relationship. They ended up settling the dispute. And then he sent him on another tour to Asia. And there was such this profound outpouring of love for my father during that tour from people all over the world that it really made him feel like, he had another role in life, like a later role. So so Johnson did that, and I've always, remembered that about him, that he had that kind of, that grain of compassion at that point.
I mean, people are just so complex.
Yeah.
The way they can share the best and worst of them, like inside the same minute.
Yeah.
And when Johnson took over, did he keep your father on as Attorney General?
Yeah, my father stayed for a while and then resigned. He stayed till he was going to run for Senate. So he stayed on, but he didn't really go to work. And also, half of his employees at the Justice Department were FBI agents who worked for Hoover. And he had a buzzer on his desk for Hoover, which nobody had ever done. He actually treated Hoover J. Edgar Hoover as his employee. And no other attorney general had ever dared to do that. And I went up to, me and my brothers would go up there and push the button, and, Hoover would have to come up, and he would be very, very pissed off. And I was in Hoover.
But that wasn't a smart thing to do, was it? No.
I mean, when we were kids, one time...
to humiliate Hoover.
He wasn't humiliating him. He was trying to bring him under control, because he was, he had become a power to himself. And my father was, you need to report to the Attorney General. I'm your putative boss, and I am your actual boss. So as soon as Jack was killed, it was J. Edgar Hoover who called my father and told him that his brother had been shot. And then, an hour later, he called him and told him his brother was dead. And my father told a friend of his, he said the tone that he used when he told me that was the same tone that he would use, kind of a matter-of-fact tone that he would use if he had discovered a communist on the faculty of Emory University, that he would call him up for that. So it was like, it was a message. And then after that, he never spoke to my father again.
Wow.
So even though my father continued to be his putative boss, he was now had a direct pipeline to the White House, which is how it had always worked. So Jack was the only president he could not call directly. Right. He had to go through my father, which he deeply resented.
And that's the good part of reckless. It also means brave, I mean, your uncle, who was president, made the biggest political sacrifice I think any political party ever made. The South used to be called the Solid South, meaning the solid Democratic South. But that's because the Democratic Party allowed them to be horrible racists. Jack Kennedy, one of the main reasons why a lot of the people, like my family, big Kennedy lovers, thought he was great was because he had the guts to say, yes, we're going to probably lose this entire region of the country, but this one issue can't go on like this. It's been 100 years since the Civil War. We have to start this process. And then the South became pretty much the Republican South. I think it's still, solid South, but now solid Republican. That's the most massive trade-off I know of in American politics.
When they signed the Civil Rights Bill, Johnson said, well, we've lost the South for a generation.
More than a generation.
Yeah.
But, that's right. I brought you now you must have this in your home. I don't know, but you probably do. This must have been in my home. But I found it a few weeks ago. I thought, oh, you're coming. I have to give you this. If you don't have it, you should have it. It's called As We Remember Joe.
How did you get that?
Exactly. How did I get that? It's this book about your Uncle Joe, who was the first candidate to tragically die, kind of weirdly, in the most normal way in a war, World War II. And this is must have been in my house. Why, is it rare?
Yeah, it was a private printing.
It's a private printing, right? It's all these...
I'm trying to remember if you were ever at my house where you may have...
You think I purloined this?
Pat you down next time.
No, but like all these great people, they have tributes from, including John F. Kennedy and, everybody and his brother, and the family. I mean, it's just a beautiful thing. So, if do you have it?
Yeah, but
if you want another one, it means more to you. Since it's a private printing, maybe I shouldn't have ever had it to begin with. If anybody stole it, it was my father. It wasn't me. But I know it meant a lot to him because I took it with, when I moved from the East Coast.
That's my Uncle Joe.
Oh, yeah.
He was lieutenant in the Naval Air Force out of England. And he flew 42 missions.
Wow.
Which made him eligible for discharge. And they asked him to, at that point, they were looking for people to volunteer for a super dangerous mission. And the mission was, it was the first they had invented the first remote controlled aircraft. So it's an aircraft that you could steer remote control. And they were going to load the plane with bombs. And then they were going to have the pilot would take off the plane because they needed it in the air, couldn't take off by remote control. My Uncle Joe was supposed to parachute out just before it crossed the English Channel. And there was a tracking plane that would follow it, and it was supposed to fly into the submarine nests on the coast of the Netherlands, and it was a fully loaded bomb, and the follow plane turned on the remote control, and the minute they did that, the plane exploded and vaporized.
Oh fuck!
My uncle's body was never found. 20 years later, my grandfather, if you mentioned his name, Joe's name, he was the oldest brother, and he was kind of the golden child. My grandfather would break into tears, and he never got over it. And then his eldest daughter died 2 years later in another air crash.
Yeah, I mean, the House of Atreus bad luck that your family has had is just, astounding. But I find it refreshing that you're willing to make a bet that very often where people think we are in history is lagging behind where we really are, and then events like elections or events, and people go, oh fuck, we didn't think we were that bad, but we elected Trump. We are that bad. We're like the OJ trial when we saw that split screen of black people are crazy happy and white people are like it's their own brother who was killed. It's like, oh wow, we're nowhere still racially, that kind of stuff. And you're making a bet that we're in a different place now. I can run for president and sit here with this pot-smoking atheist on a podcast, and we can shoot the shit like real people. Because Trump especially, you got to give him that. He sort of brought it down to the vernacular level in a big way. This guy wasn't afraid to say pussy and motherfucker and shit and shithole. And America's like, yeah, we're kind of a slovenly country. We're not a formal people anymore. It's not 1960, And I think you're right. You have to look like the people who are voting for you and act like them. They had too many decades of reality television and now social media. Everybody's everywhere. You can't pretend that you're something that's not them. You sit around, you drink, you say fuck, whatever, all these things, and it's they're not going to hold that against you. If anything, that's going to give you some cred. So, I'd say you should smoke this, but that maybe is going too far.
That'd be 40 years of sobriety.
No, and you said you didn't like it.
Yeah,
But I might vote for you. But I might vote for you anyway. But also,
let me
like,
ask you something.
yeah,
On the, something happened to liberals, to our fellow liberals.
yes, we're on that
And
page
whatever it was,
Yes.
accelerated, amplified during the pandemic.
There's a lot we agree on,
Yeah, and so
but there's some things we don't. Where I just want to know, because look, if you're going to make this campaign happen, the one thing that they're never going to stop talking about is vaccines. And, you have to answer for Santino on the Causeway. People are going to want to know. And look, I have taken a lot of shit for being, what a lot of people call an anti-vaxxer, which really is just a vaccine skeptic. But they like to move the goalposts and make you a worse somehow outlier. And no, I'm very much on the page, and people know this, of like, I was not on board with how we handled COVID.
But what was your evolution? When did you say? Hey,
a long time ago. I was on 16 Minutes quoted me like in 2009 or something, saying I wouldn't get a flu shot. Not because
I'm not talking about vaccines so much, but just on what was happening in COVID. With the lockdowns.
First of all, one thing I don't understand about the COVID thing is how come, I'm sure you know about the Great Barrington Letter that was signed by 16,000 doctors and scientists who were all dissenting about how we were handling it. How come your doctors only count? I'm not talking to you, I'm talking to the Western medicine. How come your doctors, they're the ones, that's the science? And like if it was one guy out there, but it's like a lot of accredited people. So like I think that is one reason why you came out of the gate at 20%. Because there's just a lot more people in this country who are onto that kind of thing. And how much medical science, conventional medicine, is wrong and gets things wrong, including about COVID. Lots of things they got wrong. And then where I think we are not on the same page is I don't believe all vaccines are bad. There are some vaccines I would want if I thought the pathogen was serious enough.
And what do you think I think?
Well, let's get into that. Let's make you the candidate that can get past this issue, because you're going to have to get past this issue if you're going to go anywhere. So I think your idea of connecting like the pharmaceutical industry, and that certainly had to do with how COVID was handled, with the bigger issue of corporate America having too much of a stranglehold on this country, that is a great issue. It's a little, not obvious, so you're going to have to explain it to people. You can handle that, I'm sure, but that's where I feel this should start. Is like, before this, you were a guy who was so concerned, and still are, of course, about the environment and did so much. And this is just kind of another tributary to that river. This is sort of environmental vaccines. It's like, what is going to keep me healthy? What's going in my body? That kind of stuff.
Yeah,
so,
and it was the same issue that, it's an issue of corporate capture. It's an issue of government agencies being subverted, and democracy being subverted, and government agencies transformed through these mechanisms of corporate capture, into sock puppets for the industries they're supposed to regulate.
So you're talking about the FDA?
Oh yeah, before that it was the EPA that I was, probably 20% of my environmental cases were against federal and state agencies who were doing sweetheart deals with the industries they were supposed to regulate. And that, so it was easy for me when I when I got dragged kicking and screaming because I didn't want to do vaccines into the vaccine realm. It was easy for me to understand what was happening because I'd seen it happening at EPA.
That's an important point people shouldn't know.
And I got dragged in, unlike most people are in this space or were in this space because their children suffered vaccine injuries, or, let's put it neutrally, that they believed their children had suffered vaccine injuries. And I was just somebody who believed that you should listen to women who were,
if I may, as the moderator, just for anyone listening who's the super skeptic type, vaccine injuries, or that is a fact that there are vaccine injuries. That's why there's a vaccine court. Vaccines are a medical intervention like so many other drugs, and we don't say they're bad because we know they have side effects, but we just have to admit, first of all, that they do have side effects. Hopefully not bad, hopefully not all. We can debate what they are, but let's start from, yes, vaccines, like any other drug, have side effects and serious side effects. And now let's have a debate about how widespread is that. See, that's someplace where we part. I think you think the vaccine injuries from COVID vaccines did more damage than I do.
Well, see, I don't have thoughts except I see the science. I'm a person who...
Well, there's a lot of... You can read statistics many ways. And you can cherry pick and leave things out, which is what they do.
And that's why you need to read science critically to make sure that's not being done, which is what I try to do. But in terms of the regular vaccine schedule, CDC had been telling people for many, many years that injuries were 1 in a million. CDC recognized, the reason the Vaccine Act was passed that gave immunity from liability to these companies is because they said the vaccines could not be produced, that they were unavoidably unsafe. And that phrase is in the 1986 statute, and it's in the Supreme Court Brucewitz case, which upheld that statute. They said, okay, we're going to give them immunity from liability no matter how negligent they are, no matter how grievous your injury, no matter how reckless the behavior, no matter how shoddy their manufacturing and testing processes. You can't sue them. And the reason we gave them that liability shield is because they were able to convince the Reagan White House that vaccines could not be made safe. They're going to injure certain people. The question then is, are those rare injuries? And CDC says, yes, they were very rare, 1 in a million. But when CDC finally studied that question in a study called the Lazarus study, which was published in Pediatrics I think it was Pediatrics in 2010, and anybody can look this up. What they found is that the actual rate of injury was about, I think, 2.3%, which is 1 out of every 37 people. And so that had injury claims, that they made claims to their insurance company.
From what vaccine?
From all vaccines. The average injury rate is 1 in 37.
What is the range of that injury? If my arm swells up for a day, does that count as part of it?
It was injuries for which people made claims, medical claims.
Right.
And so
doesn't mean that those medical claims are valid. And when people have looked at this, what they've said is, a lot of the people who make claims, they don't let you know that they have some pre-existing condition. So it
well, yeah, but there's listen, 54% of Americans have chronic disease.
Oh, yeah.
So, you're supposed to design the product for all the people, not just for the Avengers.
That's why, where I am with you is I do not believe you can make me get a vaccine. You should not.
Well, yeah, because I believe people should have a choice. That's all.
I believe the vaccine, again, I don't think you do, I think the vaccine saved millions of lives because people who were not healthy, they needed the vaccine. I just didn't want you to force it on me because I don't feel like I need it, and I should be able to make that decision about how I handle my health, especially since, again, there are all these other thousands of doctors that have to count too. Okay?
So I just would say this, and I'm not anti-vaccine, but I am pro-science. And when CDC actually, CDC for many years has said vaccines saved millions and millions of lives. But when they actually studied that issue, and they did an intensive study on decades and decades of medical records, and that study is called the Guyer study, Guyer, and they did it with Johns Hopkins in 2000. And they looked at what was the explanation for this historic drop, 85% drop in mortalities from infectious disease in the 20th century. It's one of the great episodes of history in the United States and Western Europe. There was this tremendous drop in the diminution in fatalities from infectious disease. What caused that? Was it vaccines? Was it antibiotics? Was it surgeries? Was it something else?
Why can't it be all of them?
It was actually almost none of them. The explanation for it was nutrition and sanitation. It was chlorine.
Sanitation, nutrition, I guess, got better for a while.
Nutrition was.
I feel like when we were kids, food was still basically
food. Yeah, it was actually
exactly.
like minerals.
But it was soon after that it just became more and more processed and fake and bad for you.
Chemicals and all.
Yeah.
So anyway, CDC has studied that issue, and their verdict on it was that is not true. And there's many other studies. There's another famous study called McKinley and McKinley that says that fewer than 1% of the decline in mortalities from infectious disease can be attributed to all medical interventions, including surgeries, antibiotics, and vaccines. The real heroes of human health in this country were engineers. They weren't, it wasn't the medical community.
That's true. It's true of war, too. More people usually die of, in the Civil War, more died of dysentery than the bullets. It was much more the pooping than the getting shot. I mean, that's just, disease, what has killed them?
It was 2/3 in the Civil War.
Or something. Well, let's not argue about pooping in the war.
2/3 died from disease.
Right, yeah, well, it was some ridiculous number. But what has killed more people than anything? The mosquito. Mosquitoes are the all-time serial killer.
Yeah, more than sharks.
Of course more than sharks, but more than Hitler. More than Stalin, they're just mosquitoes.
Yeah.
The Pentagon is spending their money wrong. They get more decon. Summer is here, and as the sun shines brighter, your skin deserves the utmost attention. Skincare isn't just a thing for women, and our friends at Caldera Lab are here to ensure your skin is well prepared for the season ahead. With Caldera Lab incorporated into your skincare routine, taking care of your skin has never been simpler. Their products are clinically proven and help visibly reduce wrinkles, fine lines, and signs of aging, giving you confidence and an impeccable first impression this summer. Don't miss out on joining the skincare revolution trusted by countless men. Use our exclusive link at calderalab.com/random to enjoy 20% off their best products. Caldera Lab creates high-performance men's skincare products, and the regimen leads off their product lineup, a twice-a-day routine to transform your skin. Inside this bundle, you'll find the clean slate, the base layer, and the good. The good is your go-to serum at night before bed. In every drop of this serum, there are 3.4 million antioxidant units protecting your skin. Want to know what that means? I have no clue, but that's a shitload of units. Take the leap to skin royalty with Caldera Lab. Get 20% off with our exclusive link at calderalab.com/random. That's 20% off by going to calderalab.com/random. Elevate your skincare game this summer with Caldera Lab. Do you like true crime? Check out the new season of Hot and Deadly, a true crime podcast from ID about murder and betrayal. These episodes feature direct audio from ID's all-American true crime shows: Swamp Murders, Highway to Hell, and Southern Fried Homicide. You'll hear from investigators and family members close to these cases and learn about some shocking stories, like how a bank president was found at the bottom of a swamp and what happened when a former prom teen went missing. You can also listen to all of Season 1 now. It's a lot of true crime and all available to listen to today. Listen to Hot and Deadly wherever you get your podcasts. Well, listen, I want to take issue with the media here because it incenses me how they write about you. This is the New York Times, and this is not the op-ed page. Okay, if it was the op-ed page, I get it. In chat with Musk, Kennedy pushes right-wing ideas and misinformation. Right away, I'm pissed off because misinformation, Okay, how about you're the newspaper? Just tell me what he said, and I'll decide what's misinformation. This arrogance of, we know what the misinformation is about science. I read an article in the New York Times, so you know it must be true. That's where the doctor said, I think I remember it was Navarro, and she said, nothing in medicine is fixed or precise, unlike other sciences. I thought, that says it exactly how I feel. Nothing in medicine, it's not like other sciences, like some others. I mean, okay, anyway, that's their headline. Already you're into misinformation. So you're on with the increasingly rightward-leaning chief executive Elon Musk, so now we have him painted.
Do you consider Elon Musk right-wing?
No.
Yeah, I consider him like an ultra-liberal.
I consider him a genius. Well, that's obvious. But his heart's in the right place. But I think by his own admission, he's a little spectrumy, and he does some cuckoo things that you just have to accept in him. And they seem fairly benign in the general, even though they are, head smacker. Like, why did you say that? What was that really necessary to, whatever. But in general, I think if anybody's going to figure out like how to save the planet kind of shit, we should like not piss off people like that. Okay, so Kennedy, who announced, is himself a leading vaccine skeptic and has promoted other conspiracy theories. See, I love this. They go right from he's a vaccine skeptic and other. See, if you're a skeptic, everything else is a conspiracy theory right along with it. Yet he has consistently hovered around 20%. Like that also, the arrogance of, what could be going on in the minds of these morons who are gathering to his candidacy? Okay, so they talk about Ukraine, the Mexican border. See, this is something I also agree with you with. He said pharmaceutical drugs were responsible for the rise of mass shootings in America.
Yeah, I didn't actually say that.
I'm sure you didn't.
No.
But the general...
I said it should be looked at.
It should, and it's, you know what, I don't even have to look at it. It is part of the issue.
Yeah.
The gun issue is a number of things. If people could wrap their head around more than one thing at once, yes, it's about too many guns and the Second Amendment. It's also about violence in movies and TV shows and seeing every fucking...
Well, how about video games?
And video games.
Yeah.
Having a 12-year-old boy see every issue solved by way of a gun. No, that has no effect on it. And yes, the kids are on fucking drugs. They're on Prozac. Is that the main one? But they're all on sort of these pharmaceutical...
There's been lawsuits. So the Columbine lawsuit, which was settled, there was 5 kids who sued because the shooter was on SSRIs, and that is
SSRIs.
Those are serotonin inhibitors.
I see.
And the serotonin inhibitors have black box warnings on them that says suicidal and homicidal ideation. It's not, so it's an obvious culprit. And by the way,
thank you for putting it. It's an obvious culprit that is treated in this paper as if it's an idea that we need to kill in the crib.
Yeah.
When it's not. It's okay.
And there's a study out there that shows that 23% of mass shooters were on, SSRIs. Oh, correlation doesn't prove causation.
No.
It's not proof, but it's something that we should be looking at. And by the way, we're the only country in the world that uses this much, antidepressant SSRIs. And we've always had guns. I mean, when I was a kid, there were schools that I went to where we had shooting clubs. And the kids brought their rifles to school and practiced. So kids have always had access to guns.
Right.
And they weren't going into the shoes. There's no time in American history or human history that kids were going to schools and shooting their classmates. It happened, it really started happening coterminous with the introduction of these drugs, with Prozac and the other drugs. And the countries like Switzerland have almost as many or comparable numbers of guns that we do. And the last mass shooting they've had was 21 years ago. We have one every 21 hours. Oh, it's not.
And then you also add in 2010, when everybody got a smartphone?
Yeah.
That is also, we've seen 1,000 articles about how it's rewiring the brain.
Yes.
So all these things are responsible, but it's. I guess the question for you,
I mean, what NIH should be doing, because their portfolio is to protect human health, is to actually do real studies on this stuff, and they won't. They won't because they don't want to offend the big shots, the video game companies, the cell phone companies, the telecommunication industry, or the pharmaceutical industry. So they instead they don't, and that's why they won't study vaccines either, vaccine safety or vaccine risk, because they do not want the answer. And that's why they won't study. Why? Look, let's say I'm wrong, and autism did not come. That vaccines are not a factor in this exponential growth in autism. Let's say I'm wrong about that. And all the studies that I've cited, hundreds of studies that suggest that are wrong, okay? Well, then what is it? Something happened. The CDC's own data show we went from 1 in 10,000 people having autism in my generation, in your generation, to 1 in every 34 in my kids' generation. So what happened?
Okay,
something happened, and it could be. Look, it could be there. EPA did a study. Congress said to EPA, "What year did the epidemic start?" EPA said it's a red line. It happened 1989. That's when the autism epidemic started. So you have to look at a toxin that became ubiquitous around 1989. And there are a number of things it could be. It could be glyphosate.
I am very sympathetic to this theory.
It could be cell phones.
But why? Yes.
It could be.
But why
make it to
okay? But this is what they're going to say to you, and I need to know the answer to this. Then why have they done many studies, including ones that were not funded by the pharmaceutical industry, and including ones from other countries, that all found out, they all came to the conclusion, autism, no connection to vaccines at all. I agree with you. I am skeptical of this. I think they just don't want to.
There's 14 studies. I can go through each one of them, and they were all, they're epidemiological studies.
So they're just lying when they say there's no studies?
Of course. No, there's 14 studies, but on the side that shows that autism is caused by vaccines, there's over 100 studies. I, in fact, did a book in which I listed all of those studies and digested them, in other words, summarized them all, and you can go and source them. And I have over 450 studies summarized, and I have 1,400 citations.
Okay. The question for your campaign is...
I'm not talking about this stuff on my campaign. I'm just talking between you and me.
That's a ridiculous assumption. Of course you're going to have to talk about you.
Well, if somebody asks me, I'm going to.
They're all going to ask you. Are you serious?
No,
this is all they're going to ask you about. You think they're your friends who want to help you?
No, they don't want to.
They want to go to the most vulnerable point, which is you're a kook because you don't believe in vaccines. That's not me talking.
No.
I don't believe that, but that's what they.
Do you believe I don't believe in vaccines?
I believe you are more.
I just believe in science.
I understand, but
show me the science.
Bobby, but let's not talk about, again, the science. That's the thing. That's the mistake they made. I believe in science too.
Listen,
but just like the other side of it.
Let me just say this.
We have different.
Every medicine is required to do placebo-controlled trials. That's what science is. You give a group of people, a cohort of people, the medicine, and then you give a similarly situated cohort of people the placebo. And then you look at health outcomes over a 4 or 5 year period, because many of the impact of the outcomes are going to have long diagnostic horizons and long incubation periods, so you won't see them immediately. You need to do it. Anthony Fauci just said 8 years for a vaccine. You need to watch them for a while. Those studies have the only medicine that never gets tested are vaccines, and that is what I object to. It's not. I'm not saying that.
Not only the only one
effective. All I'm saying is let's test them the way that we test other medications. That does not seem unreasonable.
That is not unreasonable.
Well, that's my position. That's my position.
Well, great. Because what I was going to say is, how do we translate this complex stuff that we're talking about? You're in a debate now. You have 90 seconds. And you have to say it in a way that like gets people on your side in, or
Yeah, my
could be
delay is,
30.
I don't object to vaccines. Show me where I got it wrong.
No, I'm just saying this has to be put into the sound bites. That's a challenge because this is a complex subject. And
Who do you think I'm going to debate?
well, if you're in the Democratic primary, you're going to debate Joe Biden.
You think Joe Biden will ever debate me?
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. That would be.
He should.
I mean, I would give 6 weeks' pay, which I just lost because of the strike, to see that. But okay, but let me vent more because this fucking pisses me off. Okay, so he has used his campaign platform and his famous name to promote misinformation, and again, whose misinformation? Because I seem to remember washing the mail for 3 days for about 6 months before they said, we got that wrong. Wait, I'm not saying they're corrupt for getting that wrong. My overarching thing about medicine and vaccines and all of it is that people just don't see how much we're at the infancy of understanding how the human body works.
Yeah.
And they get so much wrong. Just last year, they announced they got metabolism wrong. Metabolism is a pretty basic thing. They also got depression wrong. It's not the serotonin. They got the wrong culprit. Okay, these are some basic things. They really don't know that much. Doctors have a bad attitude, an arrogant attitude of like, we know so much more than we used to. Yeah, more than we used to. My liver doesn't care about that. My liver only cares about what you probably going to know in 100 years. We haven't cured cancer or Parkinson's or a million things. So don't sit there with the white lab coat and look at me like, just do what we say. When have we ever got anyone wrong? You got a lot wrong, including about COVID. They said the vaccine would not, you couldn't pass it or get it, and they were wrong about both. In my personal history, I didn't have it for 14 months when we didn't have it. I didn't want to get it, but I knew I couldn't do my job if I didn't. So I didn't get COVID the whole 14 months, and I was not trying to avoid it. Some people would say I was trying to get it. And then as soon as I got the vaccine, like a month later, I got COVID. I think they're connected because I think the human body is like that. It's very complicated, and when you get the vaccine, it by its design, it lowered my immune system. My immune system is doing fine on its own. That's my point. And then I got it, but because I had the vaccine, also might be the reason why when I got it, it wasn't severe at all. I barely knew I had it. Do you think that's possible?
Maybe. Here's what the science says now. Okay, the Cleveland Clinic did a study of 51,000 employees, and what they say is the vaccine works for about 2 months, and then it wanes precipitously, and within 7 months. It has waned into what is called negative efficacy. In other words, if you got the vaccine, you're much more likely to get sick. You're much more likely to get
You're
COVID.
much more likely to get it. I don't know if you're much more likely to get too sick. I think both things can be true.
You're 3.5 times more likely to get it, and the more vaccines you had, the more likely you are to get COVID. In other words, if you had multiple boosters, you're more likely to get sick. But the question you just asked, are you better off, in terms of the kind of ultimate outcome, are you better off in avoiding death or serious, hospitalization? And my belief about that is there is no advantage to the vaccine, although there are claims that there are, but the science.
I don't think that's framed the right way. There's advantages for some and not others.
Yeah.
I just want the personal liberty to say, yes, if I was 90, I might go get the vaccine tomorrow. I don't know. My issue with this is that Every individual is so different. What do you eat? Do you have a fungal infection that's not even diagnosed? How many x-rays have you had? What are your genetics? How many metals are in your body? There's a million things that could...
Do you have diabetes? Do you have vitamin D deficiency?
Everything. And how many vaccines? Yes, I would put that in the mix too. Have you had? All of this should be taken into account, or I would like to have the liberty to take that into account, decide, oh no, I think my immune system can handle this better, or, I'm sure your vaccine is on the level and it's good, but not for me right now. Just like, can you imagine forcing everybody to all take amoxicillin or something? I wouldn't put it past them. I don't want an antibiotic. I'm glad they exist, like I'm glad vaccines exist in case I need them. I mean, if smallpox came back, wouldn't you get a vaccine for that?
Probably would. I've already had it.
Smallpox?
I've had the smallpox vaccine multiple
Oh, the
times.
vaccine, right. Yeah, so...
Never had smallpox, was eradicated. And
So you're not a nut. Okay. Mr. Kennedy, here's what you are, is a longtime amplifier and propagator of baseless theories. Again, not the editorial page. This is like the regular newspaper. He is repeated to host... Jesus Christ. Okay, so here's the ones they fact-check. He said that after the Affordable Care Act of 2010, Democrats were earning more money from pharma than Republicans. And then they say an analysis by Stat News says the opposite. Who's right?
my understanding is that Democrats, and this is what I said, Democrats prior to the Affordable Care Act, prior to the battle of the Affordable Care Act, were reluctant to take pharmaceutical money. And so Republicans were getting more money than them. And after the Affordable Care Act, or during that battle, it became permissible suddenly for Democrats to take pharmaceutical money because the Obama administration made a deal with the pharmaceutical industry to support the bill. So today, I believe they're wrong. Today, I believe the Democrats are getting more money from pharma than Republicans, which is what I said.
Even if that's not exactly the case, the spirit of the answer is correct.
Yeah.
That, yes. And Obamacare, I remember that fight very well.
Yeah.
And the first thing they had to do was appease the pharmaceutical
Exactly.
And that was number one, job one to get
It's
it.
the only way they could get it passed.
Yes. And that is something I've always been a huge
And they
critic
made the
of.
deal with them that there would be no bargaining over drug prices. That was the deal.
Okay.
Okay, what's my next? What's my next?
Now, you know what?
Big.
Fuck them. I just want to say, I'm doing this for a reason. One, because I think they deserve richly to be mocked for that attitude. I just do not like the attitude. And this gets back to what you said when you first sat down there, like, liberals are different than we were kids. These are not our grandfather's liberals. You know, I think liberals are still liberals, but for whatever reason, woke became the word. I know it's not always blah, 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 but that's the word people use now for left gone too far. And left just changed their attitude. In a lot of ways, they're the opposite of liberals. I mean, liberalism was about, let's have a colorblind society. That's not where they're at. They're at, let's notice race always first and fundamentally as the most important thing. That's not a good attitude. It's not even appropriate to today, I don't think. And it doesn't make things better.
It's divisive.
It's divisive.
And it's, I don't think it's consistent with, the people I knew who were on the front lines during the civil rights movement, that's not the outcome. But also, I mean, the issue of censorship was completely, liberals had such antipathy towards any kind of censorship.
Right.
There was no time in history where the people who were censoring free speech were the good guys. They were always the bad guys.
Well, now you're doing my show for me, because that's, of course I'm going to take that personally, free speech.
Yeah.
I mean, and it's so ironic that you're totally right, and I know it firsthand. I used to get attacked much more and worried for my job much more from the right. I mean, I did lose politically incorrect because the right got mad at me.
Well, I forgot what they got mad at you
Because I
in the
said
war one time, right? The Iraq war. Didn't you get-
I've had so many scandals as I was blowing the smoke behind the curtain. No, I said, it was
Forgot what it was.
It was our first show back after 9/11. And Dinesh D'Souza,
yeah, that's
the
right.
conservative guest, said they were not cowards, they were warriors. And I agreed with him. And somehow he got in a cab and skated on that and reemerged as a complete nut. But I said, yeah, the terrorists weren't cowards, you know. And of course, there was no moral dimension to
Yeah.
that. I'm just saying they stuck with the mission, the suicide mission. Although they do have a theory that on one of the planes, like the other four guys didn't know it was a suicide mission. So like when the head guy who knew it, you know, there was 5 on each plane, when he said, okay, take off your clothes, because that's what you have to do before you die, they were like, I'm sorry, take off our what? I thought we were,
Come on.
I thought we were headed to Teterboro. Yeah, no. But I also got to say, and I'm kind of stealing my thunder from a friend of mine who you would know, but I'm not going to mention, who really said this, but I totally agree with it. Whether you're right or wrong, I think you're mostly right about this issue, especially the vaccine issue. The guts and the integrity to take that stand and stick and by your guns when media, you lose the New York Times, family, that to me is a pair of balls. I hope you use that in your ad. I hope you use that in your
You got a
campaign.
word from my next book.
I can do another take, but I really think that was the winner. Yeah. So can I plug my? I'm not getting rid of you. I want to. You're never leaving here. I just want to plug my tour dates. August 19th, I'll be at the Charlotte at the Ovens Auditorium. August 20th, Columbia Township Auditorium. September 1st. Austin, I'll be the ACL Live Theater live at the Moody, and September 2nd, the Grand Prairie. I think that's Dallas, Texas Trust CU Theater. Okay. So
Can I do a plug?
yes, and Bobby, you're running for president of the United States. I think we have a clip of. No, yes,
I'm
do a plug.
Robert F. Kennedy to the podcast, Robert F. Kennedy Jr.
Yes.
podcast, and it's on all platforms. And if you're inclined to give money to the campaign, Kennedy24.com, please contribute $5, $10, $20. We will use every penny effectively. Thank you.
So, what do you see for like sketch me the campaign in the next year? Your side of it, the Democratic side, and the Republican side with Trump now.
He's now got, I think, 11. How many people? I think there's 11 in that race. Oh,
On the Republican side, yes. Oh yeah, everybody's jumping in there.
double digits.
Mike Pence, that's going to excite the base. Mike's favorite food is water for the table. But so, where do you think? So, on the Democratic side, do you think anybody else will jump in, like Gavin Newsom?
I think Gavin would like to jump in, but I don't think he'll do it as long as Biden's in.
Right. And so I got to say about Joe Biden, he's fine. You know, look, I said it a long time ago on my show. He's like non-dairy creamer. You know, he's nobody's first choice, but he gets the job done. You know, so that's like a joke in my act. Okay, I stole it for myself, but it's true. He's like McDonald's when you're overseas. You know, it's comforting. It's not the thing you really want to, but it gets the job done. I think he's kind of snake bit. It's like he's actually accomplished more legislatively than I thought a Democrat could in this atmosphere. Like actually got bills passed about infrastructure and shit that matters, that again don't make the things that make people pull the lever. You know, because they don't hear about it. Like that bridge that didn't fall and kill you. A Democrat built that. You know, this needs. I think they do a bad job at that. But okay, so if it's just Biden and you think you
Well,
can?
it's Marianne Williamson too.
Okay, Marianne Williamson. I like Marianne Williamson, and she's not a nut either. You know, people have such a low tolerance these days. Part of what's wrong, especially on the left, but the right is no prize on this. They have such a low tolerance for like varying in your viewpoint, even by a little bit. You know, there's a lot of, well, I unfriend you. You know, if you voted for Donald Trump, yeah, lots of people voted for Donald Trump. It doesn't make them bad people. That, I think, is a fundamental problem in our country. People think if you like Trump, or a lot of people don't like him, and they still vote for him because they think he's less crazy than the woke. That, to me, is the essence of our politics. Trump can win because people think he, that madman, is less crazy than woke shit. And I get it. I totally get it. That's your freedom of speech thing. People don't like losing that. People don't like walking on eggshells, you know?
Yeah, no, I'm against the cancel culture. I think we need to talk to each other. We need to talk to people with whom we disagree. And we need to be able to learn the skill of talking gently and respectfully to each other. Say what you mean, but don't say it mean.
And accepting that people are different. They were raised different, they think different than you, they live in a different part of the country. Like, stop being in your little silos, right?
Yeah.
I mean, your problem actually is the reverse. A lot of your natural constituency now is actually in the Republican Party.
Or independents. My biggest group, my biggest cohort is independents, and then I have a lot of Republicans. You know, I've always felt comfortable talking. I mean, listen, I started my environmental career representing commercial fishermen and recreational fishermen, and built Waterkeeper Alliance, which was, which organized in those communities all over the country. A lot of the people that I was representing were former Marines who started the Riverkeeper organization. And a lot of them are Republicans. And I felt it was important to work on the front lines, getting people into the environmental movement who felt estranged from mainstream environmentalism. And for 30 years, I was the only environmentalist going on Fox News. I went on Hannity multiple times. Again, like weekly, I was going on Neil Cavuto, Hannity, Bill O'Reilly, because I think it's really important to talk with people with whom we disagree. Did you ever meet Roger Ailes?
I don't remember, but I may have. I think he asked me to twirl once. So
yeah, he got canceled. But when I was 19, I spent 3 months in a tent with him in Africa.
Ooh, that sounds wrong.
Well,
you want to phrase that?
It probably was.
Wait, 3 months in Africa in a tent with Roger Ailes?
Yeah.
God damn, I wish the writers weren't on strike. This is gold. So why? Tell me why?
He had just finished the Nixon campaign, so he was the communication and advertising director for Nixon, and then he had started I think the Merv Griffin show was one of his.
Really?
Yeah. He started the Merv Griffin show.
Did he know Merv was gay?
Was Merv gay?
Was Merv gay?
I was on that show a bunch of times.
I'm glad nothing happened.
That was at a time when nobody was gay.
Merv, I loved Merv. When I was a starting out comic in the 80s, if you were lucky, and on the rise, you did the Merv Griffin show.
Yeah.
Of course, you had to do it after you did the Johnny Carson show. They were the king. But, Merv was always so sweet, kind. They taped like 3 shows, I remember, 3:30, 4:30, and 5:30. And if it was 3:30, it was on Hollywood Boulevard. You'd get an audience of old ladies. trying to do my 26-year-old hip material about the new Sony Walkman or whatever the fuck I was talking about. And Merv would just be like, "Ooh, funny stuff. That's great stuff." You know, he just turned out to be like a billionaire.
Yeah, he did really well.
Anyway, so you're in a tent with Roger Ailes.
Well, Roger-
He starts unzipping your jacket.
Roger had a friend. He had a friend who had started an insurance company in Kenya, life insurance, which it was the first they had discovered there was no life insurance company in Africa or East Africa, and they thought this was, you know, a territory that they could open up and exploit.
Wow.
But as it turns out, there was no appetite for buying, for spending your money after you were dead on people who were your relatives. The concept was like, why would I do that?
But why were you there?
So that person, the person who started that insurance company, had then shut the insurance company because they couldn't sell any policies. But they had brought cash there, a lot of cash, in order to, you know, pay off policies. And when they tried to leave the country with the cash, the government told them, you can't do it. And so he had proposed to Roger, or Roger proposed to him, that the way to get it out was to spend it making a TV series and then sell the series abroad. So you could hire local people to do the series, and that's what he did. And he hired me to do a TV series on African wildlife and culture.
Because you had a reputation already as somebody who was
The environment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And how did this experience change you, and how will it affect the campaign, and if you should win the presidency of the United States? This experience, of all the experiences you've had
I'll
in
tell you
your
what it
storied
did.
life.
It got me, because you know, I continued to have this weird relationship with Roger throughout his career, because this was before he started Fox News.
Always in a tent?
He was a very funny guy.
Roger Ailes?
He
I
was
could see
like
that.
a comedian.
You know who's funny? Ann Coulter. Is an incredibly
I was in
funny.
a green room with her one time, but I don't know her really.
But it makes sense you were in a green room with her, yeah. No, I mean,
Did you go on
again,
a date with her?
never. Everyone says that. It's insane. I believe I have never fucked a Republican. I would. It's just that, you know, it's like you vibe with certain people. I honestly can't. I know a couple I tried, but they're Republicans. They didn't do it. They're lost. Anyway, no.
Well, yeah, Larry did that show about that.
Larry,
David.
what show?
Well, it was an
episode of Curb?
episode of Curb where it was he had kind of an arc over the season that when he married Cheryl, and he did this in his real marriage, he couldn't commit to the marriage because he felt that he could not imagine going out his entire life without ever sleeping with another woman. So she agreed to a condition that after they were married, I think for 10 years, that he could have one night off,
A hall pass.
a hall pass.
Wow.
And so so the woman who was coming on to him at that point, Cheryl says to him, you go ahead, because she doesn't believe he can get anybody to sleep with him.
Exactly.
And but there was a woman, he was shooting at that time for Mel Brooks, the producers. He was making the play. And the cast member who plays, the secretary, the ditzy secretary, was a blonde German woman. And she had the hots for Larry. This is in the show.
Really?
Yeah, and so
Good
she
for him.
agrees to this, to this union, and they go into their dressing room to consummate it. And he's getting undressed, and he sees a picture that she has of Ronald Reagan on the wall, and it kills it for him.
Really? It always got me hard. But, he was such a prick. God, when you think about where the Republican Party was under Reagan and how apathetic...
I don't think this show is going to help me in my campaign.
I think it's going to help you a lot. Honestly, you're making... I said this to you a half hour ago. You're making a bet. Lean into that bet. The bet is America's at a different place, and they are.
Okay.
They are... I'm telling you. What do you have to lose? As Trump used it, what do you have to lose? I mean, look, everybody was very impressed when you came out at 20%. I wouldn't have guessed that. That's a very high, and obviously some of that is name recognition, but it's also tapping into something. Now, that's a raging river. Can you channel that the right way? And also, what are you going to do when so you're the nominee. Now you have to debate Trump with his...
I feel like I'm the only Democrat who can beat Trump in a debate.
Yeah, that may be true.
Yeah.
Yeah, that may very well be true.
I mean, one of the reasons for that is I can hold them responsible for the lockdowns. The lockdowns cost our country $16 trillion, and they shifted $4 trillion in wealth from the middle class to the super rich. The lockdowns, while he was president, created a billionaire day. And and bankrupted. He shut down 3.3 million businesses.
Well, you're preaching to the converted on this one.
All right. Well, I don't think any of the other Democrats can talk about that issue.
No, I mean,
and I feel like I am that my element is debating people.
Again, I'm not on your level with knowing all the science, but just on the macro, just this idea we have in this country, which was exacerbated by this, that we can avoid germs. It's not healthy. And
I'm not going to talk about this in debate.
And
are you recommending this?
Oh, no, but the debates will become about medical issues. We've never seen...
Nobody wants to debate me about medical issues.
But they're going to, because you don't have to be right to win. You just have to get the crowd to think you're right, or to applaud, or to want to believe what you're fighting against something very powerful, which is that people, when it's their health, they're super scared. So what do people do when they're scared? They create this idea that there's this safe place. And what is the safe place? Western medicine, doctors. He's a doctor. He's got if someone has a white lab coat on, they think God is talking. That's the problem with the science people. The ones that are wearing masks, walking alone outside, still. These morons. When they say, the science, yes, that's when you lose me completely. So anyway,
yeah,
I'm just saying.
I've litigated hundreds of lawsuits. Almost all of those lawsuits involve some kind of scientific controversy. And every one of those lawsuits, there's experts on both sides. So when I sued Monsanto,
right,
I had experts from Yale, from Harvard, and Stanford, and Monsanto had experts from Yale, Yale, Stanford, and Harvard. And the jury believed our experts. There's always experts on both sides of every...
Right, and you can pay someone.
And you can pay somebody. They're called biostitutes.
But these kind of things, which seem a little boring and a little within the past, but these are the kind of things I think really need to be brought to the forefront of your campaign. You sued Monsanto. I think a lot of people are in the belief that I am, that Monsanto, kind of evil as far as my health goes. Like, I know you want to grow as many crops as you can, and you want to kill all the bugs, and you don't care what dies with the bugs, but I was never a big Monsanto fan. So this, as a voter, if my vote's up for grabs, and I hear, oh, Bobby Kennedy, did you know he sued Monsanto? He's the guy who went after that company with the fucking Roundup and whatever that shit is. I'd be like, yes, there's a guy who did something. Because so much of this is just talk. I mean, what is Trump? It's just all talk. They don't approach it rationally. He always comes on stage with that promises kept banner behind him. Like, what promise does this guy ever keep? They don't care. So, I forget what the lesson was there, but I'm telling you, I'm going to be your campaign manager before this is over.
Or at least my debate coach.
You're not going to... Your voice is a lot better. I got to tell you, I haven't talked to you in a while. I don't know what you did or what you've been doing.
I had surgery.
Okay, well, that settles that. Good. And it worked.
I went to Japan.
So you, like I, believe that surgery, like antibiotics, like vaccines that we don't need, should be avoided, but we're glad they exist when you have to have them.
I mean, if the surgery didn't exist, I'd be in trouble.
Yeah. So, and again, Western medicine, you know what it does great? It, like, when you're almost dead, it can stop that from happening. Like, it's great in the 24th hour, you know what I mean? It's preventive medicine, they don't even know about it, they don't care about it. It's all I care about. Is
Let me ask you something.
Yeah.
Do you consider yourself health conscious?
to the extreme.
So,
As I pick up the liquor in the pub.
because
I challenge you to find someone more health conscious than me. Can I get a light?
so what does that mean to you?
Well,
I mean, what is in here, for example?
that that is liquid
Drinking.
pot, Bobby. Liquid pot. That's what a pothead I am. Even when I'm drinking, I'm smoking pot. No, it's tequila.
It's tequila.
I just don't want to give any tequila particular brand a advertisement until they pay me for it.
Yeah, that's
We are,
good thinking.
after all, we are not communists.
Okay.
I mean, you're a capitalist, right? You believe in capitalism?
Yeah, free markets.
Thank you.
I don't
That's
like-
something a Democrat needs to say. Democrats are too suspect about, first of all, they have an image, especially among immigrants, of they're kind of down on their own country. A little too much. Yes, we have a sorry past. It is the past. You can't do anything about it now. I mean, you can do things about it now, but it can't all be about the past. And we're just basically more pessimistic and critical of ourselves than we are of almost any other country. We do have a lot of problems and had a lot of problems, but Democrats do not have a good reputation for being like, yeah, America, fuck yeah, you know?
Do you consider yourself a Democrat?
No, I never said I was in either one. I was careful to say I do caucus with the Democrats. I was a liberal, an old school liberal, not a woke liberal. But
A Kennedy Democrat.
a Kennedy Democrat and an Obama Democrat. When Trump was at
I
a
remember you telling me that you're half Jewish and half Irish, right?
half Catholic, yes, I was raised Catholic.
And was your
My
Maher that could be an Irish name?
Listen, don't get me on this subject because
let's hear it.
I don't. I love my father, and but like once they're gone, he's been gone 30 years or something. You don't think about them a lot. Kennedys make me think about my father because my father was an Irish Catholic, who, for him, in 1960, fought World War II. Just like Joe Kennedy and so many others. So they had that bond and they won and they were feeling good. And now an Irish Catholic is running for the White House and one we love his politics. And I mean, your family is charismatic. I mean, that does count for a lot. So he was in his element. And he also loved Pope John, who was the Pope at the time. He was the liberal Pope.
Yeah.
When Pope Paul took over after him, my father got very disinterested in the Catholic Church, to which I say, fucking thank you, Jesus, because he finally quit it. And I didn't have to go to church anymore when I was 13. Until then, it was pulling teeth. But yes, the idea of an Irish Catholic, liberal, good-looking president and my father had little kids at the time. So you have little kids, you won the war, your dude is the Pope.
Was he in the military?
Yes, World War II, I'm telling you. I met my mother there. Well, they knew each other in high school briefly, but my mother was a nurse, and he was
Where?
in Patton's army. I think they hooked up in, I don't know if they hooked up. No, too bad they're gone. I couldn't ask them, but they probably did. For fuck's sake, it was the war theater. They were going to hook up, but they saw each other in, I think, France, and then, I don't know, it was, like 1945, it was the end, I think, but the war was still going on. Very romantic way to start,
Yeah, and what did your dad do?
He was in radio news. So news was always in my family. It's probably why I went into this. He was kind of funny around the house and with his friends, and he was in news, and kids, I mean, I always thought it was so interesting that there's 11 kids in your family, but you're the one who got the name Robert, and you're the one who most resembles him in both, like, physically and what you say. I don't know if your father would agree with everything you say, but I think he'd be very proud of you.
Well, thank you.
I do think that, because he was such a ballsy guy. I remember my father once illustrating to me, it's so interesting, we read that thing from the Times, he was telling me about, media and like how there could never, I think they were saying something like Time magazine isn't objective, and he was saying you can never be truly objective. And he said, if you love Bobby Kennedy, he's determined. If you hate him, he's ruthless. He used your father as the example, but I know he liked him. So.
Yeah, that was kind of a common assessment. And then your mom was Jewish from where?
Yeah, but not like she never, I think, was in a temple. I've never been in a temple.
What was her last name?
Her last name?
Yeah.
Berman.
Berman, okay.
Yeah.
So it was like German?
Yeah, Hungarian. They moved to the suburbs of New Jersey in 1956, I think the year I was born, maybe the year before. And my mother walked across the street to say hello to the neighbor, Mrs. Schmidt. And Mrs. Schmidt said to my mother, we're so happy Jews didn't move here.
Because she didn't know she was Jewish.
His name was Mrs. Maher. He didn't look Jewish. And my mother never spoke to her for the next 30 years that they lived there. But that's where America was in 1955.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, I remember when my uncle.
The thought of a black person in that neighborhood would be unthinkable.
I remember when my uncle ran, and we were, they were calling us mackerel snatchers, which was, the pejorative for Catholics, because we ate fish on the
what?
Mackerel snatchers.
Mackerel snatchers.
Yeah, because we ate fish on Fridays.
Oh. That's so stupid.
I assume that's why, but that was one of the pejoratives I heard. But they had, when my uncle ran, there was tremendous anti-Catholic prejudice because they thought the Pope was coming to the White House and that he would be running things there. That was, the big issue in the campaign.
That was the big issue.
Yeah.
Oh, well, yes. They thought John F. Kennedy was going to take orders from the Pope.
Yeah, and there was actually, my wife, Mary Richardson, who died, was an architect, and she worked for an architecture firm that the head of the firm, there was a gay guy who ran the firm, and then a woman, a waspy woman named Sister Parish. She had, because a sister is a wasp name. Sometimes they use that.
I got to explain WASP, because I've noticed, I'm sorry, through time, like that's something for only our generation. People don't know it means white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, which were the people who ruled the whole country.
They ran the whole country.
I mean, yeah.
Anyway, this woman had decorated, well, Jackie hired her to decorate the White House. And she came from a very conservative design firm in New York that was very sort of extremely high end. And of course, my Aunt Jackie was very conscious of style. But when it hit the newspaper, that the woman who was decorating the White House was named Sister Parish, there was outrage coming from the Southern Baptists and people who said, "Oh, he has a nun who is now decorating the White House, who's desecrating the White House." So they thought,
wow. So, can you actually imagine living in the White House? It must have so many, like, positive and negative memories.
Yeah, I mean, my cousins were raised in the White House, and we went over there and played with them all the time. So I'm familiar with the building, and I was there often as a kid. My father was working just down the street in the Justice Department, and he'd often have us to lunch, and we'd go visit the White House. I went a couple of times to visit. I went once alone to visit my uncle, and when I was 6 years old, I wrote him a letter saying I wanted to meet with him about the environment. And he had me in, and I brought him a salamander, which I actually had caught the salamander the night before, and it died because we had just switched from well water to city water at our house. And the city water had chlorine in it, and the chlorine killed the salamander. So when I went and brought him to my uncle, he was already deceased. My uncle was pushing him with a pen, saying, I don't think he looks well.
I mean, not to make everything about the health issue,
Yeah,
but
go ahead.
But like what you just said about chlorine. Now, I probably went through the first 40 years of my life never thinking about chlorine. I'm just guessing at that number because learning is an evolution. I was always interested in health to some degree. When I was poor, I couldn't afford to eat healthy. But, I got it at a certain point. I still did a lot of pot and stuff and drugs. Okay, but like I way cut down on drinking because that's the worst one. Right? I mean, of all the things, what? I mean, cut down. I didn't say give up. I'm not a crazy person. And then I forgot what I was going to say.
You were talking about chlorine.
Oh, chlorine, yes. Okay, So there's like one of those things that I know when I talk to people about health issues, a lot of the stuff that we think is absolutely common knowledge is not common knowledge. People don't know antibiotics have bad effects also. They don't know really basic things because, of course, the medical establishment, it's not in their interest. I mean, you've seen all those pharmaceutical ads where, like, they quickly give off the side effects of a drug. But, Prozampin will make you feel great. But after they tell you, they list like 20 things. It'll make your gallbladder fall out of your ass.
There's always people having fun.
People just want the happy story. But something like chlorine, which is like such a basic daily part of our lives, could be having a big effect on our health. Again, this is like a true, really important concept that the New York Times is going to make fun of. But that if there is a way for you to make that seeable to America, I think it's very powerful.
Yeah, well, chlorine,
you're definitely the one guy to do it.
If you're drinking from a water supply that has a lot of algae in it, chlorine can be very dangerous because it produces the interaction between chlorine and organic material produces a family of chemicals called trihalomethanes, which are carcinogenic, they're teratogenic, they're mutagenic. So people are aware that it could be bad. But you're right. When we banned leaded gasoline in this country, IQs went up by about 2 points.
Yes.
So, you can do things to people that could take 10 IQ points off you,
right,
and nobody would notice it.
Right.
Right?
But enough about Donald Trump. So what do you think about them indicting him for the purloined classified files?
I mean, I thought the New York case was a terrible case.
Me too.
And they should never have bought that case. And I said that to Cheryl. We had a little bit of a row about that. Believe me, she really doesn't like Donald Trump.
Oh, chicks, huh?
Yeah, so I said it's not about whether you like him or not. It's not a good case because it's a very inventive, kind of far-fetched case that, it looks political because there's no reason really that you would bring that case other than if you wanted to get the guy.
And it's a sex scandal, and people never see past sex in a sex scandal.
I'm not sure that was a sex scandal. There was part of it, I guess it was.
Well, yeah, he was fucking
Yeah.
a porn star. How
Yeah.
come you can't get more sex in a sex scandal than
You're
that?
right. And so it looked political. And, I was a prosecutor. And prosecutors are supposed to be careful in bringing cases against that may look political or may
Right.
the optics are political.
Right.
You want to avoid the fact that the United States of America, that politicians are weaponizing the judicial system to hurt their opponents.
Right.
It's a bad thing in democracy, and prosecutors have to walk this line. Because you want to make sure that everybody knows that no matter how powerful you are, you have to obey the law. Nobody's above the law, but at the
Right.
same time,
Yes.
you have this countervailing pressure to avoid political weaponizing
And
the
set
judiciary.
precedents
Yeah,
that can't be undone.
of course, because then your opponents the next time are going to do the same
And
thing.
of course,
and it's
the
an
one,
escalating. It's an arms race after that.
the one person in the world who, this is a tough dilemma to begin with, but the one person in the world who makes this dilemma even worse, of course, is Donald Trump.
Yeah.
Because everything he does, both the impeachment trials, completely justified by the letter of the law and the spirit also. The Stormy Daniels thing is completely justified by the letter of the law. I mean, if you want to talk about the campaign to pay somebody. And now this one about the files. What was in these files is... Here's my question, as someone who knows government in and out. How come, okay, there's plans, they said, that were in the thing to, how we were going to attack Iran?
Yeah.
Why is that in a box? Really? We keep that in a fucking box with Shaq's shoe and,
I'll tell you the political issue here is also, I think, very troubling because I think Pence also had classified
Biden.
data, and Biden had it, and so the people are going to
know.
be saying, well, why aren't they going after Biden? And I don't know what Biden had or anything like that.
And of course,
here-
Trump did it 10 times worse in every way because he's Trump.
Yeah,
But
so anyway, I think it is, there's parts of it that make me nervous. The thing is that I think it is, in this case, whether it was justified to bring the case or not, that it's a really serious problem for him. And the reason for that is I don't even remember seeing, at least in, the last decade, an important case like this where a judge allowed the penetration of the attorney-client privilege. Normally anything you say to your attorney is privilege and no court can force you to disgorge that.
Right.
And it can't be used against you in any way. It's to protect this relationship with attorneys where, you want the client to tell the attorney everything so that they can give you good advice. He's your advocate. He's an extension of yourself. And you cannot compel him. Nobody can compel him to tell what those conversations were. If you could do that, there are many, many Americans who'd be in deep trouble because people tell things to their attorneys that, they confide things in them about laws they broke. And the exception for that is if the attorney was colluding with you to violate the law. I mean, if you tell an attorney, help me violate this law, it's a conspiracy. And in that case, the judge will order he will order the penetration of the attorney-client privilege. And in that case, all of your conversations become discoverable. Oh, it's not just the conversation where you were talking about violating that particular law that they found out about, but every conversation you had with them is now discoverable. And when that happens, the stuff that I've seen is going to be hard for anybody to explain.
yeah.
It's going to be hard for President Trump to explain. I think they're probably happy they're in Palm Beach trying this because he is popular down there.
But take me down the road. So I agree. When I read just some of the statements from his longtime supporters like Bill Barr, who say, Oh, well, they got him dead to rights. I mean, okay. So, say they try him, say he gets convicted because, the judges can surprise you. I know the judge is supposedly the wrong judge for this case, but the Supreme Court just made a ruling on the Voting Rights Act that surprised everybody. That was what liberals would call the right decision, and I thought it was the right decision. So, who knows? Okay, so say they convict him. He's in jail as he's running for president? It's possible?
It does not, preclude him from holding the White House, because there's only, I think, three qualifications for...
that would work for him.
Yeah, the guy who ran against my uncle, or ran against my great-grandfather, James Curley, who is the mayor of Boston. My great-grandfather, Honey Fitz, was the mayor of Boston.
Right.
And he was elected to Congress while he was in prison. And so, and there are many, Huey Long, I think, had...
Well, also jail is the greatest accreditor of what a serious person you are. I mean, when you think about the people who have spent time in jail, like Nelson Mandela, and you know what I mean, and Menachem Begin, and no, really, I mean, like, if you spend time in jail for your cause,
which I have done,
which you have done, what, besides the tent with Roger F.
No, I was in jail for the summer of 2001. I was in maximum...
2001?
2001, I was in maximum security prison in a federal...
What'd you do?
Max in Puerto Rico.
Puerto Rico?
Yeah.
You were
It was
in
a U.S. federal prison in Puerto Rico.
Was it better or worse than the Ailes thing? Why? What'd you do?
I was suing the Navy for bombing the island of Vieques, which had caused all kind of environmental problems
I know that story.
and human health problems.
Yes.
And I got a crooked judge who the Federal Court of Appeals gave me the injunction, declared he had to give me the injunction, and he would not enjoy the bombing. And so the mayor, I was representing the mayor and 10,000 people on the island, and the mayor asked me to do a civil disobedience. And I said, the attorneys are supposed to be officers of the court, so you're not really supposed to violate the law under most circumstances. But I said to him, how long will I go to, will they put me in jail? And he said, probably just a few hours. And then, when I did it, I ended up in jail for 30 days. And I was in with Eddie Olmos, Edward James Olmos.
Of course.
He came with me.
The actor.
He had a really interesting thing happen to him
What
when he
did
was
he
in
do?
jail. He was with me when we got arrested.
Oh my God, a month?
And then Dennis Rivera,
Jesus.
who was the head of the biggest labor in the United States, SEIU, and who had gotten me involved in this case, he also was in prison. But there were 140 men on our cell block. And most of them, about half of them were political prisoners. When I got there, about 60. And the rest of them were, murderers, gangsters, everything. But it was interesting. We had, for me, it was actually like a vacation because I didn't have a cell phone. And I didn't have to make any decisions. I could only use the phone for 10 minutes a day.
But it was prison?
And it was prison, and I played basketball every day.
I could never see prison as a vacation, I got to tell you. You're a badass. You are. People should know that. That's like a big selling point when you're running for president. I mean, Trump in his way.
I'm counting that nobody is actually watching this program.
Oh, there are a lot of people going to
How
watch
many
this.
people do you think watch this thing?
Oh, we know how people, millions.
Come on.
No, podcasting.
You could lose me the election with this.
No, this will get 1 million views easily.
And is it your opinion that people who are watching this are more likely?
Not at the moment, but when we it's not live. There's a writer's strike. We couldn't possibly. No. People.
Anyway, I'll tell you something. Do you want me to tell you a story, a good story that...
Oh, I'm so glad you reminded me. Yes, tell me a story, and then I want to show you this.
Well, you want to show me that? I was going to tell you what happened.
No, I want to hear your story.
When we got arrested, we were on a boat, and we ran the blockade. We had fishermen on the boat who had masks on, they had baklavas on, because they had all been arrested. And every time you get arrested, you get more time. And the numbers were painted out on the boat, and we were pursued by there was two boats. One of them were filled with people from the band Menudo. Remember Menudo?
Of course.
But they got turned back by the Coast Guard.
Menudo. Wow.
And the people who came to my trial, Jesse Jackson came to my trial, Nancy Pelosi did, Benicio del Toro, and he came to visit me in jail with his dad.
The trial was in San Juan?
Yeah.
Wow. Jesus Christ.
And
yeah, I mean, that's... and then after you got out of prison, you wrote the Band on the Run album. So listen, this is the thing I was given by Israel. No, not Israel, but like, I don't know, it was when Israel was 70. The ambassador used to do our show. I loved him. Okay, so it's all the people who were good to Israel, Reinhold Niebuhr and this dude, Harry S. Truman. And
my dad's in there.
And your dad's in here.
Yeah.
Okay, this is what I want to ask you about, because I've heard you talk about this recently, and on May 26, 1968, your father made a statement that we must defend Israel against aggression from wherever source. Our obligations to Israel, unlike our obligation towards other countries, are clear and imperative. The U.S. should without delay sell Israel 50 Phantom jets. Okay. A day later, Kennedy's strong plea for the defense of Israel appeared in the Pasadena Independent. The article enraged a Palestinian named Sirhan Sirhan. He wrote in his diary, Robert F. Kennedy must be assassinated before June 5th, which was the first anniversary of the 67 Six-Day War in Israel. The Pasadena Independent was in his pocket when he committed the act. He was killed because of his support for Israel, says Kathleen Kennedy Townsend. That's not the case? That's not the truth?
Well, he was, Sirhan was involved in the murder of my father, but he did not fire the shots that killed my father. Oh, and that...
Didn't he want to, but according to this, is that wrong that he read this story, was enraged as a Palestinian? I mean, it's the idea that the article was in his pocket when he committed the act, is that wrong?
That could be right, and I don't speculate as to what happened. All I say is that Sirhan himself could not have killed my father, and that's what Thomas Noguchi, who was the coroner, and by the way, my entire life, I believe that my uncle was killed not by a conspiracy, by a group of people. And I had doubts about that from when I was little, because when the day that we were waking my uncle in the East Room of the White House, and I was standing in the foyer of the White House with my Aunt Jackie and with my dad and my mother. And Lyndon Johnson came in and told us that Jack Ruby had killed Lee Harvey Oswald. For the people who are young people, Lee Harvey Oswald was the person who was charged with arrested for killing my uncle. And a day later, he was killed in the jailhouse by a guy, who came in.
A nightclub owner.
What?
A nightclub owner.
A nightclub owner
named Jack
who was,
Ruby.
deeply involved with the mob.
Not the worst nightclub owner I ever worked for, but
Yeah.
an asshole nonetheless.
Anyway, and I had said to my dad and my mother at that time, why did he do it? Did he love our family? Because even as a little kid, it didn't make any sense to me. Why would you go do that in public when when you're putting your own life at stake? And so that story never made any sense. And then, when I was older, I researched it. Somebody gave me a book called The Unspeakable. and I read it, and the whole story that made sense. But I still believe that my father had been killed by Sirhan. Sirhan confessed to the murder. He pled guilty, and his story is that he has no memory of it, and he stuck with that story for 60 years. So, but Paul, there was a man standing, one of my father's best friends, was standing beside him when my father was shot. And his name was Paul Schrade. He was the deputy director of the United Auto Workers, and he's the guy who recruited Cesar Chavez to the labor movement, to the United Farm Workers, and then introduced my father to Cesar Chavez, which was one of the most important relationships that my father had. And the first shot that Sirhan fired hit Paul in the head. Paul survived, and he just died less than a year ago. And he spent the last 20 years of his life trying to get Sirhan out of jail, because he did not believe that Sirhan killed my father. And I just sort of dismissed what, over years, I'd hear that Al Lowenstein, who you may remember, was trying to get my father, Sirhan out, because Al Lowenstein was a congressman, a great friend of my father's, started the Dump Johnson movement. He was later assassinated himself. He became a congressman, was killed. But he fought for many years to get Sirhan out and get the case reopened, because he did not believe that my father was killed by Sirhan. But I never looked into any details. I just assumed there were 77 eyewitnesses. Sirhan killed Robert Kennedy.
Right.
And then Paul Schrade made me come over to his house one day and read the autopsy report. How did he make me? He told me, you have to do this. And because he was such a close friend of my father's, and because he himself had been shot, I felt like I couldn't say no to him. And when I sat down and read the autopsy report, it became clear to me, as it would to anybody who read that report, that Sirhan could not have killed my father, which is what Thomas Noguchi, the coroner, the most important coroner probably in American history, concluded also, and said in his autobiography. And here's what happened, the short story. Sirhan fired 2 shots at my father. He was 5 feet away. There was, as I said, there was absolute mayhem in the kitchen of the Ambassador Hotel. My father just won the primary. He said from the stage, and now it's on to Chicago, which was where the convention was. Then he walks off the stage and he went into a route that was not expected. He was led into a route through the kitchen, which he was not supposed to go to. And waiting in the kitchen, in an ambush, was Sirhan standing in front of a steam table. And as my father approached the steam table, Sirhan fired at him 2 shots. One of those hit Paul Schrade. The other one went past my father's ear and hit a door jamb behind my father, a wooden door jamb, from which it was later removed by the LAPD. Sirhan was then grabbed by 6 men in a dog pile, and he was backed onto the steam table. And his hand, Rayford Johnson, who was a great friend of mine, one of my father's close friends, he was the decathlon gold medal winner in 1960. He was one of the people who grabbed it, and he was the one who actually grabbed his hand. And he said that Sirhan, who was a tiny little man, I've been to meet him and visit him in prison. He said the tiniest little guy. But Rayford said he had superhuman strength, and he could not get that gun out of his hand. And Sirhan now was pointing the gun away from my father and fired 6 more shots. So there's 8 shots in the barrel. He fired 6 in the other direction, the opposite direction from where my father was. All of those shots hit people. So we know who they hit. We know what happened to all of those bullets. One person got shot twice, once through his once through his clothing. And my father was shot 4 times from behind. And
so it's the same scenario as Oswald.
Let me just finish.
A patsy and a real shooter.
Right. So he was a distractor. And the real shooter was behind my father. He was a man called Eugene Thanes Cesar, who was a security guard who worked for Lockheed. He was a CIA operative. He was a vocal racist who hated the Kennedys. And he had been the one who led my father through the kitchen toward the ambush. He was holding my father's arm. He drew his gun,
Right.
and my father was shot 4 times from behind. One of the shots passed through the shoulder pad of his, harmlessly through the shoulder pad of his coat. The other 2 were into his back, and then one behind his ear, which was the fatal shot. And all of the shots had an uphill trajectory. So, and all of them, and this is what the autopsy found, were contact shots. So the barrel of the gun was touching my father's body or his clothing, and they left the discharge left carbon tattoos were less than an inch from his skin. So they left carbon tattoos on his flesh. And the autopsy was an exquisite autopsy. It's called the perfect autopsy. Thomas Noguchi, who knew what had happened in President Kennedy's autopsy, which was, loaded with scandal, did not want the same thing to happen in LA. And he said, we're not going to do Dallas again. So he flew in the top coroners from all of the armed services, the Army, Air Force, Navy, Marines, to observe what he was doing. And his autopsy is called the perfect autopsy in the medical literature. And, he concluded that the shots had come from behind. And there were 77 eyewitnesses who saw that Sirhan was never behind my father. He was always in front of him, always about 5 feet away. And all the shots that killed him. Now,
It seems so open.
he fell, and as my father fell, he must have known he was being shot from behind, because he turned around and grabbed off Cesar's clip-on tie. And you can see pictures of him lying on the floor, and he's actually lying on top of Cesar with the clip-on tie in his hand. And there's pictures of Cesar without his tie on. Cesar pushed my father off him and stood up. He was knocked down when my father fell onto him. He stood up and was seen with his gun. The police did not confiscate the gun that night, and they asked him what he was doing, and he said he drew the gun to shoot at Sirhan. And, and then that's the beginning of the story. And then Cesar made a series of changing, deceptive, lying statements after that in the different times he was questioned over many, many years. I cannot tell you what happened. I can speculate about it, but I can tell you that I cannot see any way that anybody can read that autopsy report and believe that Sirhan killed my father. And that's, my point is that it ought to be investigated. There was no trial. It was a show trial. So an attorney whose name was Grant, I forget what his last name. He appeared, nobody knows how, and became Sirhan's attorney. Who was he? He was the attorney for Johnny Roselli, the mobster who was implicated in John Kennedy's assassination in Dallas 5 years earlier, and was later chopped up and put in a barrel when the assassination committee summons him to testify. When the church committee summons him in Biscayne Bay, Miami, his body was found in Miami. He disappeared the day he was supposed to testify in front of the church committee on the assassinations, and he was involved at that time in the Friars Club scandal. So you know what the Friars Club scandal is?
No.
You know what the Friars Club is?
I certainly do that.
Right, okay, and you've probably been there and found
yes.
roasts and stuff.
Yes.
So that statute, was run by, Roselli was one of the people who was running it, and the Mickey Cohen, the LA mobster.
Yeah.
And they were doing card games there. So they had poker games. It was a place where the famous people,
it's a club.
Comedians were play
Yeah, it's a
poker.
club.
And they had installed cameras in the ceiling so they could read everybody's hands.
Oh.
And they got busted for it. And that trial was going on when my father was killed. And the attorney for Roselli at that time was the guy who weirdly showed up, nobody can explain why, and became Sirhan's attorney. And he was under federal investigation because somehow Roselli had been able to obtain the grand jury testimony, which is utterly, that's a jailhouse sentence. You cannot, that is like stealing the U.S. mail. If you steal grand jury testimony, it's such a serious crime that you're going to go to jail. The lawyer got blamed for it. So he himself was under federal investigation and was about to get disbarred. And he then ended up representing Sirhan. He was involved in concealing evidence. He was the one who told Sirhan to plead guilty, and he blocked the ballistics evidence. The bullets that killed my father were different than the bullets, which came from a different gun than the bullets that killed other people, or shot other people. Nobody else died.
So,
anyway, there's a lot of questions that should be answered, and if you look at the evidence, it doesn't make any sense. And then the LAPD.
I will never trust a guy in a bow tie again.
It wasn't
a
a
clip-on.
clip-on tie.
But so it just must be so frustrating that this seems like so clear-cut, but like the whole world thinks the reverse. I mean,
Yeah,
it's
it's a
gotta be
conspiracy theory.
Yeah, well, that's yeah, but it's not. I mean, you convinced me. Anyway, I'm going to let you go. I hope this does well for your campaign. I really think you in the mix is a great thing, because certainly somebody's got to keep them honest. And the one thing I can count on you, like, will we ever agree eye to eye on everything? No. Who do you agree eye to eye with it? Nobody. And you shouldn't. We're humans. But, somebody has to keep them honest. And the one thing I think I can count on you is you're not a guy who's going to shake the Etch-a-Sketch. Remember Mitt Romney? You're not going to attack. I don't think. Or maybe you will. I don't know. Maybe, if you get close, it's going to be very tempting to, go more to the center and disavow. Nothing in your past tells me you'll do that. You are a guy, you love me or hate me, disown me, I am sticking to what I know, or what I believe I know. That I think I can count on. I think that's gonna count a lot. Counts a lot with me. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
I appreciate it. All right. Good luck.
You need help getting out of there?
I need help in general. Wow, you're such a teetotaler and I look like such a drummer.